Welcome back, everybody. This is Dr. Kat Schreier, and welcome back to the Women of Water Get Real Virtual Summit, where we are exploring where and why women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how we can get them back, and generally, what is the status of women within the water sector? How does that impact what's going on with women in the communities that we serve? And one of the best experts on some of that, certainly on a global scale, and of course we have scheduled this summit to be released during UN Water at the United Nations in New York City. There's been a lot of work on women in water, and it used to be when you talked about women in water, you were talking about women with buckets on their heads overseas, and that didn't have any water, and now we're thinking also about women within the industry. And so someone who's been working on this for many years, Marcia Brewster, is a tremendous force in the industry. She is currently the president of the United Nations Association in Westchester, New York chapter. You can see her background, and she'll tell us a little bit more about the UN Association, and former senior officer for water resources at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And so she's going to give us a little background on this whole history on women in water. Marcia, thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. So I started my career at the UN in Bangkok at the Economic Commission for Asia and the Pacific back in the 1970s. And so the original UN Water Conference was in 1977. And our group, SCAP, contributed a lot to the plan of action from Mar del Plata. Now, the conference that's coming up in a couple of weeks on the 22nd of March is the first UN Water Conference since 1977, believe it or not. There have been a lot of international gatherings since then, World Water Forums and Stockholm Water Week every year and so on. But this is the first UN Water Conference since then. Now, during that period of time since 77, there have been 3 water decades. So the first one was 81 to 90, and the second one was 2005 to 2015, and the third, 2018 to 2028. So we're in that one now. We're in the middle of it. During the first water decade in the 1980s, I had been transferred to New York. So I was already in New York working in the Sustainable Development Division. It was called something else then, Natural Resources Division, I think. And we had a very successful committee on women in water. And each agency had, its team, and we were all working together. And in fact, the World Bank was very much pushing this idea of women in water. And the idea was to get women in developing countries involved in water management, and to teach them to fix the pumps, to teach them to take care of the water facilities, and maintain, the water facilities in their villages, and to participate in the water committees so that the men who were bringing in the facilities would know what they need. They also knew where the best source of water is. So, sort of the traditional idea about water is the Department of Community Development, or whatever it is in that country, goes to the village, and the village headman says, put it there. And usually it's on his property. And so the women don't really have access to it. They don't ask, traditionally, they didn't ask the women what kind of facility they needed. So, during the 80s, that really did change. But I think one of the reasons for getting women much more involved was because the World Bank was behind it. And the head of that campaign was Shaul Arlosarov, an Israeli, and he had a strong voice, and he sort of rammed it down the neck of everybody else. And Martin Bayer at UNICEF was also a very strong voice for getting women involved in water management. So it was kind of at the forefront of the programs in the 1980s. Then the 1990s came around, and it was all about privatization, and it was all about gender mainstreaming. So there wasn't any focus. There wasn't really a focus on women and water in
By
the
gender mainstreaming,
90s.
what
Gender
what
mainstreaming
is it?
is they say, okay, we shouldn't be focusing on women. We should be focusing on, equality between men and women. And so we don't need to have any of these affirmative action programs or, special programs for women. They should just be mainstreamed in all of the activities. But, it didn't happen like that. And my view was that you really need to have programs specifically for women, in addition to gender mainstreaming, in addition to assuming that women can be fully a part of every program. So anyway, things went downhill in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, things were better again. And I think the privatization, the whole push for privatization that was being led by the World Bank and so on, kind of soured everybody. People were fed up with it and they didn't like it. And they thought, really, water and sanitation are public goods. They're public goods, and we shouldn't be asking the private sector to supply this, because then it just becomes more expensive. And they're no better than the government at providing water. I mean, for example, I live in the Greenberg Water District here in Westchester County. I'm on the Water Advisory Committee. It's public water supply. The prices are lower than the private water supply, which is led by, it's not Suez anymore, it's Veolia, but that's in the next town. And we've got very competent engineers, we've got very competent professionals, and they can handle the water supply. So anyway, people soured on the idea of privatization of water by the 2000s, and also the UN was against it. That we were really against it. I mean, it was just like, are you going to let the private sector handle it? And if people can't afford it, then you're going to have plague, or you're going to have cholera. You can't do that. You can't do that to a society. So anyway,
we see that to some extent with COVID, that when right before COVID hit, we had the Closing the Water Access Gap report coming out here in the U.S. that showed the 2 million people, the households that don't have water and sanitation in the U.S. And then when you overlaid the hotspots, it was basically a direct match. So when people don't have the opportunity to wash their hands and have good sanitation, when people don't have access to clean water, that that has broader implications. That has disease, that has other problems, whether that's here or overseas.
Right, that's true. And look at the U.S. I mean, the infrastructure is so out of date, and there are so many areas, not just Flint, Michigan, but all over the place, the Navajo Nation and so on, that have no access to clean water supply. So no, it happens everywhere. But anyway, that my point was just that whole idea of privatizing all the water systems. People got fed up with that. I remember in England, Margaret Thatcher sort of sold off all the water facilities, not just the right to water or the right to this much water, but the whole water facility. So then the government had no control at all. And then, it all went private, and the prices went up, and the service went down. And anyway, in the 2000s, I think we got more control over it and saying, okay, look, generally speaking, most water supply systems are publicly provided throughout the world, and some are privately provided. And you don't necessarily say that one is better than the other, but look at it carefully. It's not necessarily better to give it to the private sector. And, really, public sector is often more reliable and so on. So anyway, in the mid 2000s, we had a whole lot of water ministers and environment ministers who were women. And so I remember at the Water Week in Stockholm in August, we would have these meetings with all these women ministers, and they were from South Africa and Uganda and Kenya Colombia and Bahamas and all over the world. And of course, the Scandinavian countries and the Dutch and Japan. So that was a really powerful core group of women who were pushing the idea of getting women involved in water management. So that was a very important time, I felt.
What was the basis of that push? Was it
how did it
for
happen?
workforce issues? Was it for understanding the communities they served? Was it?
It was a lot of affirmative action and special programs for women, and let's say getting women involved in engineering solutions. And I remember specifically in both Uganda and South Africa, they had these affirmative action programs to get young women involved in engineering and technical aspects of water management. So that I felt that was really a good push. And we had a lot of support from women, and we had all these 40 water ministers and so on. And then, of course, by, let's say, 2008, 2009, 2010, they had all been replaced by men, And so at that time, the reason I was so much involved in it was I was task manager of the Gender and Water Task Force at the UN. It was an interagency Gender and Water Task Force. So we had all the UN agencies. We had representatives of all the UN agencies and UN Women. So UN Women was the real spirit behind it, I must say, because, you had FAO and you had UNICEF and UNESCO and all WMO and so on. And they weren't really pushing it. It was really UN Women who was pushing it. But
UN Women, you're talking about women who were diplomats or otherwise employed by the UN who just happened to be in this UN Women group, or was it?
No. There is a separate entity for coordinating all women's issues, and that's called UN Women. It's like UN Water. UN Water coordinates all the agencies for water. UN Women coordinates all the agencies for women. So
right now that whole CSW, with the Committee on the Status of Women, is at
UN Women. That's UN Women.
And then UN Water is right in the middle of the CSW programs, or overlaps, right after, or one follows the other, or something like that.
Yeah. It's very close. Yeah. So UN Water, that's the 22nd. CSW ends on the 17th. It's all in March.
Okay.
It's all in March.
So they're one after the other. Yeah.
But anyway, so we were very active in this period of time when we had all these water ministers, and all the UN was behind. This was at the beginning. So there was the International Year of Freshwater. That was 2003. That had followed this big summit on sustainable development that was held in South Africa in 2002. So there was a lot of, and it was the first time that sanitation got on the agenda of sustainable development. It's like, anyway, it was also the Millennium Development Goals. That was 2000 to 2010. No, 2015. And so water and sanitation were part of the Millennium Development Goals. So again, there was a big push, and there was the intersection between gender and water. But anyway, I felt that that whole emphasis during those years in 2000s again got kind of lost. It got lost again in like sort of 2010 and 11. But then you also had the human right to water, the resolution on the human right to water. That was 2010. So Katerina D. Albuquerque was the rapporteur for the special rapporteur for the human right to water. And then everybody was talking about the human right to water, and countries were putting it into their constitutions, the human right to water and sanitation. Now, I'm sorry, I'm talking so much. But
there's a lot of history to cover.
There's a lot of stuff. One thing about the human right to water is really human right to an affordable source of water. Okay, so in countries like South Africa, that included this in their constitutions, and that also includes Uruguay and some other countries. The way it is that so for the basic human need, for like the first, let's say 10 cubic meters per month per family, it's almost free. It's very close to free because people have the human right to water. But once you start using more than 10 cubic meters or whatever it is, then you have to pay like, okay, I'll use dollars. So for the first 10 cubic meters, you might need to pay $1. But for the next 10 cubic meters, you have to pay $3 per cubic meter. So then, and then once you go to, let's say 20 cubic meters, then you have to pay $5 per cubic meter. So it's a progressive rate. And only the basic human needs is sort of free or very cheap.
Right.
It's not
so
like
if you want to water a big lawn or something,
you have to pay for it. You have to pay for it. And so it's not like when you say the human right to water, it doesn't mean you get the water free. Okay, that's just what I wanted to explain. And it's good if you.
That's also come up in COVID with the prohibition on shutoffs and how hard it is for utilities that are having to pay to maintain all these plants without the revenue. And so
and still in many parts of this country, in the US, you're still not paying a progressive rate. You're paying a regressive rate. So the more you use, the less you pay per unit. That I call that the Army Corps of Engineer model, because they wanted people to use more water. So it's anti-conservation. It's, encouraging you to use more water. But anyway, wrong way to go. So anyway, why don't you ask a question? Because I don't know where I'm going here.
Well, okay, so there has been this history, and then of course after the Millennial Development Goals, you've got the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and everyone now suddenly is wearing the little colorful circle buttons and talking about you have to be able
you mean
to
like this
is a 5 and a 6 and a right exactly and
5 and 6 are the ones. 5 and 6, those are the ones. Gender
5
and water.
is
gender,
and 6 is
water,
and that's water and sanitation. But there's another one that is like fish and
that's like 14 or something.
Okay, and so I mean, I guess especially with this happening here in the U.S. and you have whether you're here in the U.S., whether you're in Canada, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Asia, wherever you are, if you're focused on the local aspects of water, or water in your state or in your country, and you want to understand what's going on with all these international conferences, how do you keep up with it? And then figure out how to incorporate that, into how you serve your own community, right?
Well, of course, all communities are supposed to be involved in the Sustainable Development Goals. So, for example, if you have a program on water for the UNA, for example, you try to talk about what's happening at the international level and who are the local champions at the local level. So, for example, I told you I'm on the water committee of my town, but I'm also doing water quality sampling in the Hudson River. It's not the Hudson River, it's a tributary, it's the Sawmill River. But we have a huge group of, what do you call them? Citizen scientists, volunteers. Right. We're all volunteers, and we do these water quality samples. So you can try to pinpoint where the pollution's coming from. Let's say if there's some outtake of sewage or something like that. So definitely you can do something at the local level, which is going to improve your water quality, or maybe improve water management. Use less water at the household level, like low water using toilets, turn off your water when you don't need to have it, and rainwater harvesting, and reuse of gray water and so on. So there's a lot you can do at the local level, and there are so many guidelines about it.
Your experiences as a woman working within the UN structure and within the diplomatic arena more generally. I mean, that's, people are always flashing up photos of different international meetings and say, oh, look, there's Angela Merkel, and now she's gone, and, and all the rest are red, right? I mean, is it women? Are they pretty much in the background doing the work? Are they, is it, and of course you were there over a long period of time, and that I'm sure that changed over time, right?
When I first got to my to work at the Natural Resources Division at SCAP in Bangkok, I was the only female professional. That changed over the years, and all my colleagues had white hair. I was like 29 or something. So that's definitely changed. There are a lot more women in the professional level, and they're doing a lot of, there are a lot of women engineers these days. I remember I had a program at MIT, and everybody in the audience was a woman at MIT. Surprise. But anyway, it was still a struggle. So I was task manager of the Gender and Water Task Force for the whole UN system. And my item was always last on the agenda of UN Water. And it would come up at like 7:30 p.m. on the last day. And so everybody was sort of leaving the room. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. Yeah. So the representatives on my task force were usually the gender person from, let's say, UNICEF, or the gender person from WMO, or wherever it was. And so you didn't have the real water professionals, the engineers and the scientists. They were not on that task force. So it's still like they give the women the soft, yeah.
Right, some sociologists, whatever, right. And
economists,
some numbers, and it's all about statistics and not about the actual experiences of being a woman working in the field, the actual experience of being a woman working, with numbers and with models, and are people going to think you know what you're doing because you're a woman, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I see that and I know that you haven't been actively working on this, but we talked about this a little bit, that there are more of these organizations popping up. There's a recent World Bank gender parity study. There's people who are kind of promoting this idea of gender parity, and whether it's, as well as here in the US, a lot on water workforce, and look at all these women can be our water workforce, and yet the responses of what's going to attract women, what's going to retain women, seem to be just so simplistic of, well, if there's childcare and lactation rooms, on site, that's all women need to be equal, right?
Yeah, no, I think the problem is just the attitude. The attitude, it hasn't changed much. The attitude towards women, they're not taken seriously. Even in those water committees that I was talking about, the women hardly were able to say anything. They were just sitting in the background. You really have to be assertive. And even if you're really assertive, you may not be listened to. So, that hasn't changed much. I must say that some of those women ministers were amazing. They were amazing, and they had power. So, you have to be a secretary of the Interior, which we have. We have a woman secretary of the Interior. So that helps to have a woman in a high position who thinks about these social issues. And it's not social; it's economic. Come on, it's economic. You have the facilities work better if you have a woman in charge. I remember Shaul Ar-Lorsaraf, he used to say all the time, I don't push these women in water management because I love women. It's my projects work better,
Yeah.
They don't break down. And they don't break down because the women are there. The men are off in the fields, doing their irrigated agriculture. But the women are there. They can maintain the pump. They can make sure it works, or tell somebody if it doesn't work. Oh, it's another funny anecdote is, so when they're doing a survey, if they don't try to define the women's view and the man's view at the household level, if they don't try to disaggregate by gender. So the surveyor comes and he says, do you have access to water? Do you have access to clean water? And the man says, yes. And do you have access to sanitation? Yes. If you were to ask the woman the same question, she'd say, I have to walk 5 kilometers to get the water from the stream, and then I have to carry it back. And I don't exactly have good access to water. It's a different attitude,
Well, and even when you're in an urban environment or suburban or what, and Western, whatever environment, a lot of our lower income communities have more women-led house. And the consequences of lead in the pipes at private residence or in the schools or what have you. If there's children acting out because they've got contamination in the water and it's affecting their development, a lot of the women are the ones that are in the position of dealing with it. A lot of the women are becoming the community spokespersons for communities of color, for low-income communities, and so if our water utilities are mostly men, especially at the higher levels, and I did move my next meeting to we had another 15 minutes, so we can go a little longer. But if we can, is there a disconnect there? When the local utility or their engineering firm comes in and say, hey, we're from the utility, we're here to help you. Is there, what are the benefits of having women and not just down at the lower levels, but actually getting up into leadership?
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Yeah, because women are tuned into what's happening at the community level. I think men are too, but not as much. The women are taking the kids to school and they're listening to, their neighbors. And if there's a real problem, I think they're probably tuned in. And of course, really, it is true that women think more about social issues. And most of the problems in the water sector are not technical problems. They are social problems, social and economic. But you got to be tuned into the social side of things. I had the same problem at the international level because everybody was talking about economics, and then they were talking about the environment. The environment became very important, like low flows in the rivers and things like that. But there wasn't as much emphasis on the social side. And the reason water facilities break down is on the social side. It's not an environmental issue. It's not an economic issue. It's a social issue. And if the facilities break down, you have to have somebody on the ground who's going to tell, the ministry or the community development department, my water system broke down. Can you bring in some spare parts, or do we have some spare parts on hand to fix that pump? So it's really a social issue.
What can, as someone who doesn't do as much on the international scene, what could come out of this UN water? What can they do? Passing resolutions, doing anything? Do we, what can, you get some speeches shared on YouTube and spread all over LinkedIn and other social media. What are the benefits that can come out of this in terms of this idea of A, having another UN water conference, and B, having gender parity, and other women in water issues, and not just looking at, let's go help all those, poor Black and brown women with buckets on their heads that walk 5 miles uphill both ways, chased by tigers and raped by, opposing tribes or whatever, that to also look at women in the water workforce. How does this UN process work? What's going to happen? What is happening at UN Water this week? And what can they do? And what can others who are watching this program do to help?
It's a very difficult question. But anyway, I'm going to be in one special event, I think it's called a special event on Thursday, the 23rd. And it's being led by Women for Water Partnership and the Indigenous People Alliance and something else. So they are really looking at what Indigenous people have to offer. So I mean, that's again pretty far removed from water professionals in America. But you know, you've also got to think about the Navajo Nation, which doesn't have access to good water, and just getting, I don't know, getting women involved in water management. It should be a no-brainer. You know, actually, at our water district, we can't get any engineers. We can't get any engineers. You know, we have people retiring and nobody's applying. And so why aren't women, you know, I told you about that room full of women at MIT. I wonder if they are still in the water sector. You know, did they get discouraged? Did they drop out? Are they heading up a water agency? You know, I just don't know. I don't know how you can retain women. I agree that lactation rooms and childcare are not enough, but it sure helps. You know, it sure helps. But women may still be discouraged. It's just about attitudes. But I think women should get involved in engineering, and we should look at some statistics, because I know it was going up. It was definitely going up, the number of women in engineering, and it may have leveled off or gone down now, but agencies need engineers. Yeah. We need engineers. You know, maybe they're not reaching out to the right schools. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, there are statistics that have been coming out. We'll go over this more, you know, throughout the summit. You know, that we're getting closer to 50-50 in STEM, but you know, does that include nursing and science education and things like that? You know, and is that being actually used at this point? This pushback against diversity programs. You know, people talk about, oh, they're trying to get rid of critical race theory programs and gender studies programs, but it's also impacting things like women in engineering programs and women in science programs. And, you know,
no, you're right. You're right.
Need that support to be able to be prepared to go in an industry where chances are they are going to be outnumbered, that it's going to be, and that it's an industry that's really structured around a lifestyle of you're there at work 24/7, you're there to respond to emergencies, and you've got someone at home to take care of the kids and take care of anything else for you and have your dinner on the table when you come home.
True, but you know, do you know what the theme for CSW is this year? It's all about innovation and digital equity. Okay. So digital equity to empower women and girls. So we had a program yesterday for International Women's Day, and it was all about digital equity. And even in Westchester County, which is one of the most affluent counties in the country, there is a huge gap between men and women in digital equity. Women, you know, I mean, we're talking about like lower income households. A large percentage don't have access to reliable internet, and girls don't have their own computers. You know, it's a huge gap, and it's probably worse in other countries, but in this country, it's still bad. You know, you go to a computer class or a coding class, and you know, like 90% or 80% of the students are men or boys, right? So I don't know. I don't have the answer, but
using computers just to do coding. We do everything. We're taping this summit on the computer.
Absolutely. We all need it. We all need it. And it makes a huge difference. Even, you know, in developing countries, when women got access to cell phones and they could check the market price of their grain, whatever it is, you know, they need access to the internet. And
you know, funny thing is, I actually and I include a link to this years ago. Hamid Yunus, who basically created this microfinancing and the Grameen Bank, and then he has this Grameen lab that teaches other countries, because he's only in Bangladesh, how to do similar programs. And it was a business program for social entrepreneurship. He had just come out with his book on social entrepreneurship. He was at the UN. He went to, this was at NYU, and so I was in a group, and we came up with a model social entrepreneurial venture where he had these Grameen water ladies, these women who had phones,
Right.
and that they would sell access to the phones. But once everybody else had access to the phones, you had these women who knew how to use phones, right? Who had access to phones. And that we proposed this idea that as all these, as you mentioned, a lot of these, big organizations come in and they build water and sanitation facilities in lower income areas, and then don't have anyone who can fix them and maintain them and keep them working.
Exactly.
So we were basically proposing to have a training program through the phones to teach women to be the plumbers and teach women to be the operators.
Exactly. Yeah.
Keep the curtains going. And Muhammad Yunus is like, you have a social because I don't know it was actually done anything like that, but
that's exactly what's needed.
Logical.
That's exactly what's needed. Yeah. And one other thing, it's sort of related on the climate change side, is that it's also good to train women on how to respond if a flood is coming. So how to take the children up to higher ground, the animals up to higher ground, what is the access route, and how do you contact them, right? So they might not have a phone. So you have to have some kind of early warning system that will reach them, whether it's, drums or flags or whatever, because they're at home. They're at home. They can actually save people. They can save animals. So, that's what they were doing that in Bangladesh.
Yes.
They were training women to be the first responders in flooding situations.
And as far as job opportunities in the water workforce, being able to, and we are seeing more women that are able to do remote work. And of course, before COVID, it was a lot of, you got to be in the office using our computers and everything, security and everything. And during COVID, people were able to access that from home. And that gives women flexibility, whether it's because they've got kids, whether it's because husbands in the military and they're moving from place to place, they can keep working. That it isn't just about let's put childcare and lactation rooms in the workplace. Are there more flexible options for women to be able to be part of the workforce that can be available if you're able to do stuff online?
But
hopefully.
No, I'm just saying it would also be good to have some sort of affirmative action. I know it's almost impossible with the Supreme Court, but if you could encourage, like reduce student loan, whatever obligations for women in engineering professions. I mean, I don't know if it's possible under the current circumstances, but it would be good to have it. And but the other thing is, once they get the job, are they going to stay? And there you've got. I'm the only woman on the Water Advisory Committee, in case you were wondering, for our town.
And when women are, there have been all these programs and grants to universities and whatnot, billions of dollars spent on getting women and people of color into these programs. And if they then find themselves in a career path that is not welcoming of women or people of color, they can go into another market. You can't go back to being a secretary or you're doing sales or something because people say, oh, you're an engineer, you wouldn't want to do this. And I mean, when we develop Water System, we go to a lot of entrepreneurial programs, and invariably I get up and say, we're doing online programs on water, and somebody will come up to me and say, well, actually I have a background in engineering or geology or whatever. I ran into this problem, and now I'm trying to support myself and my kids by selling essential oils or selling real estate and developing an online business on, parenting coaching or whatever, because, they can't work in engineering or science or whatever they were trained in. And they're therefore considered overqualified because they have these degrees to work in anything else. And it really, it is a waste of talent and human
It
capability.
is.
Yeah.
And
So-
did they, do you think they left their engineering job because they felt unwelcome, or or did they get fired, or,
It was,
who knows?
there were situations of harassment. There were situations of
Yeah,
having their career blocked, or, comments, or, it runs the gamut. Or, that, and, or not having any flexibility to take care of their kids.
right.
And
Right.
suddenly other positions won't even consider hiring a woman with a science or an engineering degree or a law degree or what have you, because they're overqualified for the things that are more traditional career paths for women. And suddenly
Yeah.
they can't get a job anywhere. So,
Or they might get
lots-
pregnant, and they don't want to hire them because they might get pregnant.
You should be spending your time finding a husband and then going in and getting pregnant. If you're not, you're probably gay or whatever. It's just like, just let women work and let women follow their passions and do the work that they want to do. So, Marcia, thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
Really glad you're going to be at the UN Water Conference. Keep us posted. Tell us in the chat and whatnot what happens at those programs. We're going to be there in New York City. Looks like I don't have the credentials. Didn't get the confirmation. Therefore, we'll be there. There's a lot of side events in New York City. Water stuff is going on.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
And I may be
and-
at one of those, so I'll let you know about it. It's at one of the universities. I think they want. Yeah, I'll let you know.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, but we are, of course, having this program available to people anywhere around the world. If you're watching us, please type below, where you're coming from, what your experiences have been, share with us, and we look forward to really helping to stimulate the conversation and say, we got to get real about what's happening with women in water, get rid of the simplistic, assumptions, and start making it more viable for women to be working and excelling and balancing it with life, with other obligations, and still coming back, at all phases in their career.
Right. That's
Marcia,
right.
you are a force in nature, and thank you so much. And for those of you here, keep watching Women of Water Summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for joining us for this extraordinary conversation, one of 45 extraordinary conversations we had as part of the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit, where we explored where and why women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how we can stop those leaks, and even bring women back to water. I hope that you will enjoy all of these amazing interviews. If you don't have a chance to watch all of them during the summit, you have the opportunity to join us with a power pack and get lifetime access to all the videos, as well as an opportunity to join us for 30 days in a brand new community where we will dig even deeper in live facilitated conversations about some of the issues that are facing women in water. Look forward to seeing you there. Please join us at watercitizen.org/women, watercitizen.org/women for more information. See you again soon.